The silence in their Manhattan penthouse was a living thing, thick and suffocating. Outside the city glittered a galaxy of promises they had conquered together. But inside the air was sharp with the scent of expensive cologne and betrayal. Chloe rested a hand on the gentle swell of her stomach, the 5-month proof of their shared future, and watched her husband Damien as he stared out the window. When he finally turned his eyes once her home were now the cold, sterile windows of a stranger's house. "It's over, Chloe," he said the words, smooth and practiced, utterly devoid of the love that had built this life. "Scarlett and I are together now. You need to leave." The world didn't just tilt. It shattered into a million icy shards. The words hung in the air, each one a perfectly polished stone thrown at the delicate glass of Chloe's world. "It's over. Scarlett and I. You need to leave." They were simple, concise, and utterly devastating. For a moment, Chloe was certain she had misheard, that this was some cruel, elaborate joke born from the stress of his latest merger deal at Sterling and Vance Financial. She managed a small, trembling laugh that died in her throat. "Damien." "Don't be ridiculous," she said, her voice a reedy whisper. She took a step towards him, her hand instinctively tightening over her bump, a protective gesture for the tiny life that was supposed to be their greatest joy. "We're having a baby. Our baby. We just picked out the color for the nursery last week." Whispering willow. Remember, Damien didn't even flinch. His face, usually so expressive and warm, was a mask of detached indifference. He was dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit, the fabric gleaming under the recessed lighting of their cavernous living room. He looked like the man on the cover of a business magazine, not the man who had held her hand through her morning sickness and whispered promises of a family against her hair. "The nursery can be painted over," he stated, his tone as flat as an earnings report. "Chloe, this isn't a negotiation. I've retained legal counsel. My lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, will be in touch with you tomorrow to discuss the terms of the separation. They are, I assure you, very generous." Generous. The word was a slap. As if their life, their love, their unborn child could be quantified and settled like a business transaction. The name Scarlett echoed in her mind. Scarlett Dubois, the impossibly chic, razor-sharp vice president from his department. Chloe had met her at company galas. She remembered Scarlett's predatory smile, her lingering hand on Damien's arm, the way her laughter always seemed to be at someone else's expense. Chloe had dismissed her own unease as pregnancy-induced paranoia. How naive she had been. Scarlett Chloe repeated the name, tasting like poison. "How long? Damien! How long have you been lying to me?" He had the decency to look away, then his gaze falling on a piece of abstract art they had bought in Soho on their 2nd anniversary. It was a swirl of chaotic colors, and for the first time Chloe felt she understood its meaning. "It doesn't matter," he said, his voice clipped. "What matters is the future. My future. And it's with her. And our child." Chloe's voice cracked, the raw pain finally breaking through the shock. "Is our child not part of your future?" Damien sighed an exasperated sound that shredded what was left of her heart. "Of course I'll provide for the child. There will be a substantial trust fund, the best schools, the best of everything. My child will not want for anything material." Material. The word was so cold, so clinical. He spoke of their baby as if it were an asset to be managed, a line item on a balance sheet. Tears streamed down Chloe's face, now hot and silent. This wasn't the man she married. The The man she married had dreamed of teaching their son to play catch in Central Park, of braiding their daughter's hair. This man, this stranger in the expensive suit, saw only obligations and expenses. "I want you out by the end of the week," he continued, turning back to her, his composure absolute. "I've arranged for you to stay at the Carlisle temporarily. All your things will be moved into storage, and you can have them sent wherever you decide to go. It's cleaner this way." Cleaner. He was sanitizing his life, scrubbing away the inconvenient stains of a pregnant wife to make room for his shiny new model. The shock was beginning to recede, replaced by a wave of white-hot fury. "Get out," she sputtered. "This is my home, Damien. I designed this space. Every book on these shelves, every piece of furniture, we chose it together." "Technically," he said, and the cruelty in his voice was surgical. "The penthouse is a corporate asset under my name. You have no legal claim to it, just as you have no claim to the joint accounts which, as of this afternoon, have been frozen pending the divorce settlement. For your protection, of course." The floor seemed to drop away. Frozen. He had cut her off completely. She was an architect, but she'd put her burgeoning career on hold to support his managing their properties and their life so he could focus on his meteoric rise. Most of their assets were tied to his name, his career. He had planned this, every last detail. The doorbell chimed a melodious, jarring sound in the tense silence. Damien walked to the door and opened it, and there she was. Scarlett Dubois, draped in a blood-red dress that clung to her like a second skin. She smiled a triumphant, unapologetic smirk that made Chloe's blood run cold. "Is she still here?" Scarlett asked, her voice a low purr as she glided into the apartment, her eyes sweeping over Chloe with disdain. She stopped beside Damien, possessively, linking her arm through his. "Darling, I thought you said this would be handled." The sight of them together, so comfortable and entitled in the heart of her home, finally broke Chloe. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a profound, crushing despair. She was no match for this. This was a corporate takeover, and she was the asset being liquidated. "I'll be gone by morning," Chloe whispered the words barely audible. She turned, unable to look at them any longer, and walked on numb legs towards the bedroom, the room where she and Damien had built their dreams. As she closed the door, she heard Scarlett's triumphant laugh echo down the hallway, the sound of her world ending. She collapsed onto the bed, her body racked with sobs, her hands clutching the small, precious life within her. She was alone, pregnant and penniless, in a city of millions. The gilded cage had not just cracked, it had been torn apart, leaving her exposed and bleeding in the ruins. The first 24 hours were a blur of cold panic and hollowed-out grief. Chloe moved through the apartment like a ghost, packing a single suitcase with trembling hands. Every object was a memory, a testament to a life that was now a lie. The photograph on the nightstand of their wedding in the Hamptons. Damien's face alight with what she had believed was adoration. The silly souvenir mug from their trip to Paris. The well-worn copy of The Great Gatsby he'd read aloud to her on rainy Sunday afternoons. She packed none of it. Those relics belonged to a woman who no longer existed. True to his word, when she tried to use her credit card to book a car service, it was declined. The word flashed in crimson on the small screen. Inactive. The humiliation was a physical blow. He had thought of everything. He hadn't just ended their marriage. He had systematically erased her from the life she had helped build. She was a non-entity, a ghost with a declined credit card. She ended up taking a yellow cab, the kind they hadn't used in years, to her friend Zoe's small but welcoming apartment in Greenwich Village. Zoe, a fiery journalist with a low tolerance for injustice, opened the door and took in Chloe's pale face and single suitcase with one sharp glance. "Oh, honey." "No," Zoe breathed, pulling her into a fierce hug. "Tell me that son of a bitch didn't." Inside, over cups of chamomile tea that Chloe couldn't bring herself to drink, the whole sordid story spilled out. Zoe listened, her expression hardening from sympathy to pure rage. "Froze the accounts, kicked you out while you're pregnant." Zoe paced her small living room, her hands clenched into fists. "That's not just grounds for divorce. That's grounds for a public execution. We'll get a lawyer, a shark. We'll take him for everything he's worth." "He already has a shark," Chloe said, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. "Mr. Abernathy, Damien said he's the best. And Zoe, everything is in his name. The apartment, the investments, the bank accounts. I was so stupid. I trusted him." "You weren't stupid, you were in love," Zoe corrected fiercely. "There's a difference. He exploited that love. This is calculated. This is sociopathic." The next few days were a living nightmare. Calls from Mr. Abernathy's office went straight to Zoe's voicemail, as Chloe couldn't bear to hear the sterile legal jargon that would dismantle her life. The initial settlement offer arrived via courier. It was an insult wrapped in legalese. A one-time payment that would barely cover a year's rent in a decent neighborhood, and a monthly child support payment that was laughably small for a man of Damien's means. The stipulation was that she had to sign a comprehensive, non-disclosure agreement, effectively silencing her forever. Damien wanted to erase her, and he was willing to pay a nominal fee to do it. The cruelty was breathtaking. He wasn't just leaving her. He was trying to bury her. Chloe spent her days on Zoe's couch, staring blankly at the ceiling, the baby inside her a constant fluttering reminder of everything she was losing. She felt a deep, terrifying shame. How could she have been so blind? How could she bring a child into this chaos? Desperation began to set in a cold, creeping dread that threatened to swallow her whole. Her own family was gone. Her mother had passed away years ago, and her father, a brilliant but gentle history professor, had died from a sudden heart attack 2 years after. She was truly alone. Or was she? One evening, as Zoe was trying to coax her to eat some soup, a memory surfaced. It was from her father's funeral. A tall, imposing man with silver hair and eyes as sharp as chips of ice. He had stood at a distance, his presence filling the room with an unspoken authority. Alistair Sterling, her godfather. Her father and Alistair had been inseparable in college, 2 brilliant minds from vastly different worlds. Her father, the son of a librarian. Alistair, the sole heir to the Sterling industrial fortune. Their friendship was legendary, but it had grown distant over the years as Alistair's empire expanded and her father retreated into academia. Alistair had sent her a lavish wedding gift, but hadn't attended the ceremony, sending his apologies from a business trip in Tokyo. She hadn't seen or spoken to him in years, save for a polite, formal Christmas card exchange. He was a ghost from her past, a figure of immense power and wealth who seemed to belong to another universe. Reaching out to him felt like a desperate, pathetic plea. What would she even say? "Hello, Godfather, it's been a decade. My husband, the man you warned my father was too polished, just left me for his colleague and has cut me off financially while I'm carrying his child. Could you possibly help?" "What is it?" Zoe asked, noticing the flicker of something in Chloe's eyes. "My godfather," Chloe said slowly, the idea taking root. "Alistair Sterling." Zoe's spoon clattered onto the plate. Alistair Sterling, as in the Alistair Sterling. The reclusive billionaire, the one they call the kingmaker of Wall Street. Chloe nodded numbly. "My father was his best friend." "Chloe." Zoe grabbed her shoulders, her eyes wide with urgency. "You have to call him. Right now. You said Damien works for Sterling and Vance. Is that no relation?" Chloe clarified. "Just a coincidence in the name. Damien's firm is a different entity, but Alistair, he's powerful." The thought was terrifying. Alistair was a man who moved markets with a single phone call. He lived in a world of unimaginable influence. To him, her marital problems would be a trivial domestic squabble. He would probably think her weak and foolish. The Sterling name was synonymous with strength, with ruthless precision. But then she thought of the baby. Her baby. This wasn't just about her pride anymore. It was about survival. It was about fighting for the child who deserved so much more than a father who saw him as a line item and a mother on the brink of despair. Her hands trembled as she searched for his number. She had an old address book of her father's, and tucked inside was a private number for Alistair's personal assistant labeled "in case of emergency." If this wasn't an emergency, she didn't know what was. Taking a deep breath, steeling her nerves, she dialed the number. A crisp, professional voice answered on the first ring. "Mr. Sterling's office." "Hello," Chloe began, her voice shaking. "My name is Chloe Reed. My father was Robert Thorne. I need to speak with my godfather, Mr. Sterling. It's urgent." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a heart-stopping moment, Chloe thought she would be dismissed, shuffled off to some junior secretary. Then the voice returned, warmer now. "Please hold for Mr. Sterling, Miss Thorne." They had used her maiden name. He remembered. A sliver of hope, the first she'd felt in days, pierced through the suffocating darkness. After another moment of silence, a new voice came on the line. It was deep, resonant, and carried an unmistakable weight of command. "Chloe. Is that you, child?" The sound of his voice, a voice she hadn't heard in 10 years, broke through her carefully constructed composure. A sob escaped her lips. "Alistair." She cried the name, a desperate plea. "I need your help." The helicopter descended onto a perfectly manicured lawn, its blades whipping the cool autumn air. Below a sprawling stone manor sat nestled amidst hundreds of acres of private forest in upstate New York. This was Sterling Estate Alistair's legendary sanctuary, a place so private that few photographs of it even existed. Chloe stepped out of the aircraft, clutching the small bag Zoe had helped her pack, feeling as though she had stepped into another century. A stern-looking man in a dark suit, whom she would come to know as Mr. Harrington, Alistair's head of security and legal affairs, led her into the house. The interior was not opulent in the modern, flashy way Damien's penthouse had been. This was old money, quiet and confident. Dark wood paneling, priceless tapestries, shelves lined with leather-bound first editions, and the faint, pleasant scent of wood smoke and old paper. Alistair Sterling was waiting for her in a vast library, seated in a worn leather armchair by a roaring fireplace. He was older than she remembered his silver hair, now stark white, but his eyes were the same, an intense, piercing blue. that seemed to see right through you. He rose as she entered, and despite his age, he moved with a vigor that belied his years. "Chloe," he said, his deep voice softening. He didn't offer a handshake or a formal greeting. Instead, he opened his arms, and Chloe, overwhelmed, walked into his embrace. It was not a warm, cuddly hug, but it was solid, protective, and for the first time in weeks, she felt safe. "You should have called sooner." He gestured for her to sit in the chair opposite his. A butler appeared silently and placed a tray with tea and small sandwiches between them. Now Alistair said, his gaze unwavering as he sat back down. "Tell me everything, and do not leave out a single detail. I want to know the man's name, his position, his ambitions, and every last word he said to you." And so she told him. The story tumbled out more coherent this time, fueled by the quiet strength of his presence. She spoke of Damien's ambition, his charm, his cold transformation. She described Scarlet, the public humiliation, the frozen bank accounts, the insulting settlement offer. She explained her own naivety, her shame, her fear for the baby. Through it all, Alistair listened without interruption. His face was unreadable, a stony mask, but she saw a muscle tighten in his jaw, and his blue eyes grew colder, harder. When she finished, the only sound in the room was the crackling of the fire. Alistair steepled his long fingers, his gaze fixed on a point in the middle distance. "Robert, your father never trusted him," Alistair said, his voice a low rumble. "He told me once that Damien Reed had a wolf's smile and a calculator for a heart. I warned him to advise you against the marriage, but Robert was too soft. He wanted his daughter to be happy, and you were blindingly in love." He looked at her then, and she saw a flicker of something that looked like regret. "I should have intervened. I let my friendship with your father fade. A mistake I will not make with his daughter." He stood and walked over to a large, ornate desk. He pressed a button on an intercom. "Harrington, get in here." Mr. Harrington entered the room as silently as the butler had. "I want a complete workup on a Damien Reed Senior Vice President at Thorne and Associates, and a Scarlett Dubois, same company. I want to know everything. Financials, career history, personal associations, debts, vices. I want to know where they buy their coffee and who launders their shirts. I want every skeleton in their closets exhumed, polished, and presented to me by Friday." "Consider it done," Sir Harrington said, with a curt nod, and left. Alistair turned back to Chloe. "You will stay here. The East Wing will be prepared for you. My personal physician will see to you and the baby. You will want for nothing. Your only job is to rest and stay healthy. My job," he said, a dangerous glint in his eye, "is to handle Mr. Reed." "What are you going to do?" Chloe asked, a tremor of both fear and anticipation in her voice. "There are two ways to deal with a pest child," Alistair explained, picking up a heavy crystal decanter of whiskey and pouring a small measure into a glass. "You can swat it, which is noisy and messy, or you can carefully dismantle its nest brick by brick until it has nowhere left to live. Then it simply disappears. I prefer the second method. It's quieter, more permanent, and infinitely more satisfying." He took a sip of his whiskey. "This Damien character has built his life on a foundation of ambition and image. He craves status power, the approval of his peers. We will not attack him directly. We will simply remove the pillars holding his world up one by one. His reputation, his career, his finances, and his new associate." Over the next few days, Sterling Estate became Chloe's sanctuary. She was given a beautiful suite of rooms overlooking a serene lake. She had long walks in the crisp autumn air, ate nourishing meals prepared by a private chef, and for the first time in months, she slept through the night. The constant gnawing anxiety began to recede, replaced by a tentative sense of hope. She saw little of Alistair, who was consumed by a flurry of quiet, intense activity. She would see him in his library, on the phone, his voice a low, commanding murmur. Mr. Harrington came and went, delivering thick files that Alistair would read with predatory focus. On Friday morning, Alistair summoned her back to the library. The files were spread across his desk. "Our Mr. Reed is not just an adulterer. He's a fool." Alistair began, his tone laced with contempt. "He's over-leveraged. He used his projected bonus to secure a private loan for a high-risk tech venture which is currently failing. He's been padding his expense reports for years, small amounts, but the pattern is clear. And most interestingly, the last big merger he managed. There are irregularities, discrepancies in the valuation that benefited a shell corporation." He slid a photograph across the desk. It was of Scarlett, laughing with a man at a cafe. "And Miss Dubois. She has a reputation. She attaches herself to rising stars, uses them for their connections and status, and discards them when a better opportunity presents itself. Before Damien, it was a director at a rival firm. Before him, an heir to a shipping fortune. She's a parasite, and Damien is her current host. But the shell corporation from Damien's merger deal, it's registered to her brother." Chloe stared, her mind reeling. It wasn't just an affair. It was a conspiracy. They were grifters working together. "They are playing a dangerous game," Alistair said, his eyes like ice. "And they think they are winning. Now it's our turn to play." He picked up his phone. "We will not destroy Damien Reed. We will simply create the conditions for him to destroy himself. The first pillar to go will be his career." Damien Reed felt invincible. He and Scarlett were the new power couple at Thorne and Associates. With Chloe gone, a relic of his humbler past, his life felt streamlined, upgraded. He and Scarlett moved her things into the penthouse, her vibrant modern tastes quickly overwriting Chloe's quieter, more classic aesthetic. They hosted lavish dinner parties, their laughter echoing in the halls where Chloe's tears had fallen. Damien had what he had always wanted, a woman who was a partner in his ambition, not just a gentle soul who managed his home. Scarlett was a reflection of his own ruthless drive. His career was at its zenith. He was leading the acquisition of a promising new fintech company, a deal that would cement his reputation and guarantee him a staggering year-end bonus. He paraded Scarlett at corporate events, her presence on his arm, a clear signal of his new unapologetic power. He ignored the pitying or disapproving looks from some of the older colleagues who had been fond of Chloe. They were dinosaurs, he thought. They didn't understand the new rules of the game. The first crack in his perfect world appeared on a Tuesday morning. It was a small thing. A conference call with the board of the fintech company was abruptly postponed. No reason was given, just a curt email from their CEO citing an internal review. Damien was annoyed but not concerned. Corporate jitters were common in deals of this size. Then a few days later, a more unsettling event occurred. He was in a meeting with the firm's CFO, presenting his projected numbers for the acquisition. The CFO, a notoriously meticulous man named Peterson, peered at the documents over his glasses. "These valuations," Reed Peterson said slowly. "They seem optimistic. I'm getting some conflicting third-party analysis. Whispers of an inflated asset portfolio. Damien's smile tightened. My team did its due diligence, Peterson. The numbers are solid. Perhaps, Peterson said, non-committally. But the board is getting nervous. Someone on the acquisition target's side must be getting cold feet and leaking negative spin. Tighten it up, Reed. I don't like uncertainty. Damien left the meeting with a knot of unease in his stomach. Whispers. Uncertainty. These were not words he was accustomed to. He spent the rest of the day on the phone calling his contacts, trying to shore up the deal. But he was met with a strange coolness. People who had once taken his calls instantly were now suddenly in meetings. Emails went unanswered for hours. Scarlett, ever the pragmatist, was dismissive. It's just a rough patch, darling. She purred, massaging his shoulders as he stared out the penthouse window, the view no longer seeming so triumphant. You're the best deal maker they have. They need you. Just show them who's in charge. But the whispers grew louder. An anonymous email began circulating among the senior partners, raising questions about Damien's aggressive accounting practices on past deals. It was vague, containing no concrete proof, but it planted a seed of doubt. It was poison in the water supply. His paranoia began to fester. He snapped at his junior analysts, accusing them of leaking information. He started seeing rivals in every corner, imagining conspiracies to sabotage his deal. The pressure mounted, and the strain began to show. The easy charm that had defined him was replaced by a brittle defensive arrogance. The real blow came the following week. The firm announced a surprise audit of all major ongoing projects, with a specific focus on Damien's fintech acquisition. It was presented as a routine procedural update, but everyone knew what it was, a vote of no confidence. His authority was being publicly undermined. That night, he and Scarlett had a vicious argument. You need to control this, Damien. She hissed, her perfect composure finally cracking. You look weak. They're walking all over you. This isn't the man I signed up for. What do you want me to do? Scarlett. He shot back, his voice rising. Someone is actively working against me. This isn't just bad luck. It's a targeted attack. Then find out who it is and crush them, she demanded. This is our future, our money. Don't you dare let it slip away because you're too busy feeling sorry for yourself. The accusation stung. He was Damien Reed. He didn't get attacked. He was the attacker. He resolved to fight back. He started digging, trying to find the source of the leaks, the origin of the rumors. He hired a private investigator, a discreet but expensive man, who promised results. Days later, the investigator came back with nothing. It's like I'm chasing a ghost, the man said, looking perplexed. The rumors seemed to spring from everywhere and nowhere at once. The financial counter-analysis on your deal is coming from a highly respected but notoriously anonymous consulting group in Switzerland. The email came from a multiply encrypted server. Whoever is doing this is a professional, a ghost in the machine. They have deep pockets and are masters of subtlety. Damien felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't a rival at the firm. This was something else. Something bigger and far more dangerous. His world, which had seemed so solid and secure just weeks ago, was now built on shifting sand. The pillars were groaning under the weight of whispers and shadows, and for the first time in his life, Damien Reed was afraid. He was losing control, and he had no idea who his enemy was. He never once considered the quiet, gentle wife he had discarded. He had already forgotten her, but somewhere in the quiet hills of upstate New York, her godfather had not. while Damien's world was slowly corroding Chloe's, was being meticulously rebuilt. The first few weeks at Stirling Estate were a gentle recovery. Dr. Evans Alister's personal physician was a kind, motherly woman who monitored her pregnancy closely, reassuring her that both she and the baby were strong and healthy. The initial shock and trauma began to fade, replaced by a quiet, growing resolve. Alister, true to his word, insulated her from the ugliness of the divorce. He had engaged a legal team from one of New York's most prestigious family law firms. They were not the aggressive sharks Zoe had envisioned, but lions poised, powerful, and patient. They countered Mr. Abernathy's insulting offer with a calm, firm rejection and a simple statement: "We will await a more equitable proposal based on full financial disclosure." The message was clear. The days of bullying Chloe into submission were over. One afternoon, Alister found her sketching in a notebook in the garden. She had been an architect, after all, and the instinct to create was returning. "What is that?" he asked, peering over her shoulder. "Just an idea," she said a little shyly. "A community center. A space with a library for children, workshops for adults, a green roof for everyone. A place that builds people up, not just houses them." Alister studied the intricate drawings, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Your father once told me you had more talent in your little finger than half the celebrated architects in this city. He said you designed with your heart." The mention of her father brought a sad smile to her face. He was biased. He was rarely wrong, Alister countered. He paused, then said, "My foundation has been looking to fund a new philanthropic project, a centerpiece for urban renewal in a neglected part of the Bronx. It needs a lead architect, someone with vision, someone who understands the importance of community." Chloe stared at him, her heart starting to beat faster. "Alister, I haven't worked on a project in years. I'm not—" "You are Chloe Thorne," he interrupted gently but firmly. "Daughter of Robert Thorne, and the best person for the job. We'll set up a studio for you here on the estate. You'll have a full team at your disposal, a blank check for resources. Create this, build it, not for me. For yourself it was a lifeline, but it was more than that. It was a purpose. For the first time since Damien had shattered her world, Chloe felt a spark of her old self ignite. The project consumed her. She threw herself into the work, her days filled with blueprints, model building, and video conferences with engineers and city planners. The pregnancy, once a source of fear and uncertainty, now felt like a wellspring of creative energy. She was building two things at once, a community center and a new life for herself and her child. Meanwhile, Mr. Harrington's investigation into Damien and Scarlett continued peeling back layers of deceit with surgical precision. The information he uncovered was far worse than mere corporate malfeasance. The shell corporation registered to Scarlett's brother wasn't just used in the one merger Harrington reported to Alister one evening, Chloe now present for these updates. It's a pattern. For the last 3 years, on every major deal, Damien has managed this entity, has purchased stock in the target company weeks before the acquisition announcement, selling it immediately after for a substantial profit. It's classic insider trading. He laid out bank statements and transaction records, and Ms. Dubois is the primary beneficiary. Damien takes the career risk. She launders and reaps the financial rewards. They've funneled over $7 million this way. It was a sickening revelation. Their entire relationship, their partnership, was built on a foundation of criminal activity. Damien's ambition wasn't just a personality flaw. It was a pathology that had led him deep into a world of fraud and deceit. Furthermore, Harrington continued, his voice grim. Damien Reed has a history. In his first job out of business school, a senior mentor took him under his wing. 6 months later, that mentor was fired for gross incompetence after a project he and Damien were leading failed spectacularly. Documents later proved the failure was due to a catastrophic error made by Damien, which he skillfully blamed on his superior. Chloe felt sick. The charm, the ambition, the charisma, it was all a facade, hiding a man who would stop at nothing to get ahead, leaving a trail of wreckage in his wake. She had been the latest casualty. The SEC would be very interested in these transaction records, Alistair mused, looking at the documents with a cold, calculating gaze, as would the board of directors at Thorne & Associates. And the press, I imagine. What do we do? Chloe asked, her voice quiet. Part of her wanted to see him ruined, to see him pay for the pain he had caused. Another smaller part, the part that had once loved him, flinched at the thought of such utter destruction. We do nothing. For now, Alistair said. A cornered animal is dangerous and unpredictable. A confident animal, however, will walk directly into a trap. Damien is currently hosting a major fundraising gala for the New York Arts Council. He and Ms. Dubois are the co-chairs. It's their grand debut as the city's newest power couple. They believe they have weathered the storm. They think they are about to celebrate their victory. Alistair looked from the damning financial records to Chloe's architectural blueprints spread across the table. It seems a fitting venue for the final act, he said, a grim smile touching his lips. They want to be in the spotlight, so let's give them one. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a glittering spectacle of New York's elite. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. The air hummed with the sound of champagne flutes clinking polite laughter and the relentless murmur of networking. At the center of it all, standing on the dais, were Damien Reed and Scarlett Dubois. They were radiant. Damien, in a perfectly tailored Tom Ford tuxedo, projected an aura of effortless success. Scarlett was breathtaking in a shimmering silver gown, her neck adorned with a diamond necklace that caught the light with every turn of her head. They looked like royalty, the king and queen of their universe. The whispers that had plagued Damien's career seemed a distant memory. The fintech deal, while not yet closed, was back on track after he had made several costly concessions. Tonight was his coronation, his public declaration that he was untouchable. He raised a glass. To the arts, he began, his voice smooth and confident, broadcast through the room's sound system, and to building a future where creativity and commerce walk hand in hand. Scarlett and I are thrilled to... As he spoke, a quiet, coordinated series of events, set in motion by a single command from Alistair Sterling, began to unfold. Across the city, in the pre-dawn quiet of a newsroom, the business editor of the New York Times received an encrypted file from a trusted source. It contained meticulously documented evidence of insider trading, shell corporations, and financial fraud, all pointing directly at Damien Reed and Scarlett Dubois. The editor, recognizing the scoop of a lifetime, immediately put his best investigative team on it. The headline was already ready writing itself. Simultaneously, an identical file was delivered to the chairman of the board of Thorne & Associates at his private residence, along with a courtesy copy to the Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Back in the ballroom, as Damien was finishing his speech to a round of applause, the first ripples of the coming tsunami began to spread. Several high-profile CEOs and investment bankers in the room discreetly checked their phones. Their expressions shifted from polite interest to shock. They began to murmur to one another, casting furtive, stunned glances towards the stage. Damien and Scarlet, basking in the applause, were oblivious. They stepped down from the dais, ready to receive the adulation of the crowd. But instead of fawning admirers, they were met with a strange, sudden coolness. People averted their eyes. Conversations stopped abruptly as they approached. A palpable tension filled the air. "What's going on?" Scarlet whispered to Damien, her perfect smile faltering. "Why is everyone looking at us like that?" Before Damien could answer, his own phone buzzed. It was the chairman of the board. Damien excused himself, forcing a casual smile. "Arthur, wonderful to hear from you. I trust you're enjoying the—" "Don't you Arthur me, you son of a bitch!" The voice on the other end snarled thick with fury. "Have you seen the news alerts? The SEC has just opened a formal investigation. Insider trading. Fraud. My firm's name is being dragged through the mud. You are finished, Reed. Your access has been revoked. Security is escorting you out of the building first thing in the morning. Don't even bother showing up. You're fired." The line went dead. Damien stood frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear. The blood drained from his face. Fired. Investigated. Finished. The words hammered in his brain. He looked up and saw Scarlet, talking to a rival executive, a man she had once dated. As she talked, she subtly, almost imperceptibly distanced herself from Damien's side, creating a few feet of physical space between them. The executive showed her something on his phone. Scarlet's eyes widened in horror. Her mask of cool sophistication shattered, replaced by raw panic. The murmuring in the room was now a roar. Everyone was on their phones reading the breaking news alerts that were lighting up screens across the ballroom. Wall Street rising star in SEC probe. Thorne & Associates VP accused of multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. Damien felt hundreds of pairs of eyes on him. They were no longer looks of admiration or envy, but of contempt, morbid curiosity, and schadenfreude. He was no longer the king. He was the spectacle. He was the carcass that the vultures were beginning to circle. He reached for Scarlet's arm, his last anchor in the storm. "Scarlet! We have to." She snatched her arm away as if his touch were toxic. Her face was a mask of cold fury. She spat her voice a venomous whisper for his ears only. "There is no we. You did this. Your sloppiness, your arrogance. You are a liability. I have my own career to think of." With that, she turned her back on him. In a masterful act of public theater, she walked directly over to the rival executive, placed a hand on his arm, and said in a voice loud enough for those nearby to hear, "Can you believe the audacity I feel so used? I had no idea what he was doing. The betrayal was so swift, so absolute, that it knocked the air from Damien's lungs. The woman for whom he had thrown away his marriage, his family had just cut him loose and thrown him to the wolves to save herself. The implosion was complete. In the space of 15 minutes, Damien Reed had lost his job, his reputation, his fortune, and his partner in crime. He stood alone in the center of the magnificent ballroom, a pariah in a tuxedo, the glittering chandeliers now seeming to mock him. He was a ghost haunting the scene of his own coronation, which had just become his execution. He finally understood. This wasn't bad luck. It was a demolition. And as he stumbled out of the ballroom into the cold night air, stripped of everything, he still had no idea whose hand had lit the fuse. 6 months later, the spring sunshine streamed through the large windows of Chloe's new office in the Bronx. From her desk, she could see the construction site below, a hive of activity. The steel skeleton of the Robert Thorne Community Center was rising from the ground, a tangible symbol of hope and renewal. Her hope, her renewal. Chloe, now 8.5 months pregnant, moved with the slow, deliberate grace of late pregnancy. She was no longer the timid, broken woman who had fled her penthouse apartment. She was the lead architect of a multi-million-dollar project, a respected professional whose vision and quiet determination had earned her the admiration of her entire team. She was a woman who had found her footing not by leaning on a man, but by standing on her own. The chaos of Damien's downfall had played out in the media for weeks, a salacious tale of greed and betrayal. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Damien's legal team had advised him to plead guilty to lesser charges to avoid a lengthy prison sentence. He was facing years of probation, crippling financial penalties, and a permanent ban from the securities industry. He had lost everything: the penthouse, the career, the status. He was a broken man, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. Scarlett, ever the survivor, had managed to escape criminal charges by cooperating fully with the investigation, painting herself as a victim of Damien's manipulation. Her reputation was in tatters, however, and she had quietly resigned from her position and disappeared from the New York social scene. The diamonds and the power were gone, and without them she was just another ambitious woman with a tarnished past. Chloe had her final meeting with her lawyers the week before. The divorce was finalized. Alistair's legal team had ensured she received a settlement that was not just equitable, but punitive. With Damien's fraudulent earnings seized by the government, the settlement was drawn from his few remaining legitimate assets. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to provide a secure future for her and her child. More importantly, it was a legal acknowledgement of his profound betrayal. She had signed the papers without a trace of sadness, only a quiet sense of closure. Alistair had become a permanent, cherished part of her life. He was no longer the distant, intimidating figure of her childhood, but a true godfather in every sense of the word. He visited the construction site weekly, his shrewd eyes missing no detail, a proud paternal smile on his face as he watched Chloe command her team. He spoke often of her father, sharing stories she had never heard, bridging the gap between her past and her future. He was the family she thought she had lost. Her friend Zoe was a frequent visitor, marveling at the transformation. "Look at you," Zoe said one afternoon, placing a hand on Chloe's belly. "Running a major project, about to have a baby, looking like a goddess. If this isn't the definition of winning, I don't know what is." Chloe smiled, a genuine, radiant smile. "It doesn't feel like winning, Zoe. It just feels right. Like I'm finally living the life I was supposed to build all along." A few weeks later, Chloe gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby boy. She named him Robert after her father. She sat in her new, sun-filled apartment, a spacious, comfortable home she had chosen, and paid for herself, rocking her son in her arms. He had her eyes and a stubborn little tuft of dark hair. He was perfect. He was hers. Alistair came to visit, bearing not extravagant gifts, but a simple, beautifully carved wooden rocking horse he said had been his as a child. He stood by the crib, looking down at the sleeping infant, his usually stern face softened with an emotion Chloe had never seen before. "Your father would be so proud of you, Chloe," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not because of what you've built out there." He gestured towards the window in the direction of the rising community center, "but because of what you've built in here." He tapped his heart. "You found your strength, not in revenge, but in creation. That is the greatest victory of all." Chloe looked down at her son, his tiny hand wrapped around her finger. The pain of Damien's betrayal was now a distant scar, a reminder of a past life that no longer felt like her own. She had lost a husband, a home, and a life she thought she wanted. But in its place, she had found her purpose, her independence, a true sense of family, and a love more profound than any she had ever known. She had her son. She had a future she was designing herself from the ground up. And for the first time in a very long time, the blueprint was perfectly clear. Chloe's journey from the depths of a devastating betrayal to the pinnacle of personal and professional triumph is a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit. She didn't just survive. She rebuilt her life on a foundation of her own strength, talent, and courage. Her story reminds us that sometimes the most catastrophic endings are merely doorways to new, more authentic beginnings. It proves that true power isn't about wealth or status, but about integrity, creativity, and the unwavering love of those who truly have your back. In the end, the penthouse was just a gilded cage, and it took losing it all for her to finally learn how to fly. If Chloe's story of strength and justice moved you, please give this video a like to show your support. Share it with someone who might need a reminder of their own inner power. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of overcoming adversity and finding triumph. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.